friends. Welcome to the November 2022 edition of Barnstorming with Jason Ringenberg. Today I'm going to talk about the impact that the great Jerry Lee Lewis had on the music and presentation of Jason and the Scorchers in the 1980s. Before I came to Nashville in 1981, I was, of course, listening to Jerry Lee Lewis a lot. In my junior and senior year of college, I was in two rock bands, Shakespeare's Riot and the Catalinas, and I was fronting these bands, and Jerry Lee was sort of a template for me. He was the sort of epitome of what a rock and roll frontman could be. I like to say that Elvis Presley invented rock and roll, but Jerry Lee Lewis perfected it. He could just walk on stage and own that stage, and he had this incredible quality of bringing out the best in the musicians around him, no matter who was playing with him. They always sounded really good. He always had great bands. So Jerry Lee, in that sense, was a big inspiration to me. When I moved to Nashville and started Jason and the Nashville Scorchers, in the beginning, there was very little that me and Warner and Perry and Jeff agreed on in terms of what artists were you know, the giants that we were standing on the shoulders of. But one artist we always agreed on was Jerry Lee Lewis. That was for sure. All four of us were really into the whole Jerry Lee thing. Jeff sort of respected that Jerry Lee was the one who invented the whole outlaw rebel rock and roll character. Jerry Lee was that. He invented it single-handedly. Warner appreciated that Jerry Lee was just a fantastic musician, one of the greatest piano players of the 20th century. And Warner appreciated that. Perry sort of liked the whole Jerry Lee humor that he had, and how Jerry Lee would just sparkle in his interviews and say these really, really funny things in his interviews. And I, of course, just pretty much dug everything about the artistry of Jerry Lee Lewis. Now, not only were we into Jerry Lee, but the people around our band were very into him as well. Our two managers, Jack Emerson and Andy McLennan, were big Jerry Lee Lewis fans. Andy had seen Jerry Lee countless times. Anytime Jerry Lee was anywhere in the South, Andy would go check him out, go to the show. Our tour manager, our road manager, Ronnie Douglas, who was with us all those years in the vintage years from the very beginning to when we finally called it quits in the late 80s. Ronnie was also a Jerry Lee Lewis fan. Now in 1982 or early 83, Andy McLennan and Andy put together a little cassette tape, and it had two songs on it. One was Boogie Woogie Man from Tennessee by Jerry Lee Lewis, and the other was Dixie Doodle by Link Wray. It was an instrumental of Link doing a mashup of Yankee Doodle and Dixie. We took that little cassette, and we never lost it miraculously. We took that little cassette everywhere we went. Every show we did in the early and mid 80s, we would go on stage to that cassette. Ronnie would make sure the sound man had it, and he would play it, and then we would know it's time to go on. It became a ritual for us, really. Now, in a lot of those shows, especially if we started hitting and got our major record deals and stuff, and we were opening for these corporate rock bands, they didn't want any part of this. They didn't want any part of us playing any music before we went on, and especially Jerry Lee Lewis and Link Wray. But Ronnie not only was he really a cool guy, he was also could be tough when he needed to be. And he could be a little imposing. Ronnie was a tough guy. So he would make sure that the people that were telling him that, no, we're not going to play this tape, you can't do that, it's not in the contract, he would just kind of get tough with them, and they would end up always playing our little intro tape. Like I said, it became a ritual. And I also stressed to Ronnie, and he always did this, to clear the dressing room right before we go on. Right before you play that tape, make sure the dressing room is cleared. So it's just the four of us right there alone in the dressing room, so we can get our heads cut into the whole thing. You know, by the mid-'80s, of course, our dressing rooms were packed always. We were a young, happening band and, on the way up. So a lot of times there was, you just packed with folks some of them who didn't even care about Jason and the Scorchers. So Ronnie, it was a really great thing that he did that. So he put that tape on, and it just sort of solidified the idea that we were standing on the shoulders of a great giant with Jerry Lee Lewis. We knew that now it was our turn to own these stages, to walk on and own the stage, because that's one thing Jerry Lee Lewis always did. No matter what little dinky stage he was on at crummy sound systems, it didn't make any difference. He would always deliver his best. He always owned that stage. So we try to carry on that tradition. And boy, that boogie woogie man from Tennessee, when he hit that line, I'm like a backwater bullfrog ready to jump. Oh man, that made my heart jump. And every time, that would just do something to us. We just sort of coalesced as one unit and walked on stage and did our best. Now in the 80s and 90s, I got to see Jerry Lee twice. Once was at Ryman Auditorium in the mid-90s. Of course, that was a great show. Everybody that plays the Ryman Auditorium, it's always great because it's such a cool venue. Jerry Lee did a great show. He had James Burton on guitar. Kenny Loveless was on fiddle and guitar as well. Kenny, of course, had played with him for decades. We also had Kenny Loveless on Lost and Found and on Still Standing. He played on Ocean of Doubt, Blanket of Sorrow, and Far Behind. His fiddle work on Far Behind is just simply amazing. The show, though, that I remember most from that time was, it was 84 or 85, I'm not exactly sure of the year, but Jerry Lee was playing at this little dive in North Nashville. And this is back when North Nashville, it was essentially a war zone. It was a really rough place. Andy McClendon, to his eternal credit, Andy brought tickets to the show. He bought me a ticket to the show and said, you're going to this. You're just going. No matter what's going on, if we have interviews, we're going to cancel them. If we have a show, we're going to make it worth it. You go to this show. That's how serious Andy was about me seeing Jerry Lee. So to his eternal credit, we made it all happen. We went together to the show. Immediately I was struck that, this is different than most shows that I normally go to. For starters, the place was really a dump. It was a dive. I don't even remember the name of it now, but it was really a dive. And there was these sort of mob vibes about the whole thing. There was a lot of just very shady people around, and the whole thing struck me as somebody was paying somebody a favor or doing somebody a favor to repay a debt or something. It was something like that. They had Jerry Lee out in the parking lot. It was a gravel parking lot. There was ruts in the lot and trash all over. They had a flatbed truck for Jerry and his band to perform on in this really crummy sound system. It was a light show that wasn't really a light show at all. It was just a few little lights kind of shining in the dark. It was really late at night for starters. But when Jerry Lee hit the stage, you'd have thought he was playing Madison Square Garden. It was, man, the minute he walked on stage, he just owned it, and he was rocking right from the start. Now, the audience was a mix of some of us Nashville rock and roll scenesters, hipsters. But mostly it was folks that had been listening to Jerry Lee Lewis for a long, long time. These people were in their 40s and in their 50s. And they'd been listening since Great Balls of Fire and a whole lot of shaking going on. They had, the men had the slick back hair, and this was at a time when slick back hair was completely unfashionable. The wives had the bouffant blonde, bleach blonde hairs, poofed way out, tight pants. And there they were to experience someone that meant the world to them. They just believed in Jerry Lee Lewis. They got something special when they went to his shows. And this show was no different. For about half the show, the audience was sort of scattered about. It wasn't a packed house by any means. And there were some hay bales and folding chairs and sort of wooden benches on concrete bricko blocks that people were just kind of sitting around. But about halfway through, Jerry Lee, I think he was doing Mean Woman Blues, I believe, if my memory serves me correct. And about halfway through, before he went on into a solo, he sort of nodded at the audience. He did this sort of thing like this. And Jerry Lee, for all his huge ego, Jerry Lee always knew he was the greatest. There was no problem there. He knew that. But what Jerry Lee was really about in terms of a live performer was that he just wanted to share the rock and roll experience with his audience. He wanted them to feel, his audience to feel the exuberance and the enthusiasm that he felt about rock and roll when he was rocking. That's what he wanted. That's what he was all about. It wasn't a Jerry Lee trip, really. It was a group trip. He wanted to involve everybody. And I think in that respect, he influenced countless people after him, including Bruce Springsteen and John Mellencamp and Fogerty and myself as well, in a big way. So when he did that, when he made that motion, everybody just got out of their seats, kicked over the chairs and stuff, and ran to the front, right in front where Jerry Lee was. We were all right there in front of him. And Jerry, that just knocked things up even more intense. He then delivered a stunning rock and roll show. It is the most memorable show I have ever seen. It was the most memorable show I've ever seen in my life. My favorite rock and roll concert was seeing Jerry Lee Lewis in that little dumpy place in North Nashville. Now, during the show, he did all his rock and roll hits. He closed with a whole lot of shaking, of course. But before I sing my little song today, I would just like to say one statement that maybe people aren't saying enough of right now. As I said earlier, all kinds of stuff is being written about Jerry Lee now, and said about Jerry Lee now. Most of it really laudatory and explaining and complimenting the impact he had on music. But also a lot of people still condemning Jerry Lee Lewis for his lifestyle and some of the mistakes that he made or might have made or that got pinned on him in some cases. But Jerry Lee Lewis that night, as well as playing his rock and roll hits and rocking like crazy, he also did gospel numbers as well. I'll Fly Away was simply transcendent that night. And if you listen to any of his versions, he's recorded it several times, any of his versions, I challenge anybody to listen to him doing I'll Fly Away and saying that, and not saying that he at least had some Christ grace in him to be able to do that. He had some, folks. I can't judge, or I can't, and I won't forgive or judge in any way. That's not for me to do. That'd be presumptuous of me. But I will say, I think Jerry Lee had his own relationship to God and Christ as well. I do believe that. And he was never a hypocrite about it. He would always say, I'm going to hell, I've made so many mistakes, I'm wicked, I'm a rock and roller, it's devil's music that I play, and I've done a lot of bad things in my life. But he also had the grace in him. I do believe that. Now the song I'm going to do is from the All Over Creation record, and it does reference Jerry Lee Lewis. There was that great book about Elvis called The Last Train to Memphis, which really inspired me to write this song. It's sort of about the whole Memphis experience and atmosphere, and a little bit of sadness that probably the best days of Memphis are behind us. But still, I'm certain, I don't know for a fact, but they probably will lay Jerry Lee, or have laid Jerry Lee to rest somewhere in the Memphis area. So here's my little song, my little, tiny tribute to the Memphis people of which Jerry Lee Lewis was a part of. This is called The Last Train to Memphis. And I would like to dedicate this song to Andy McLennan and to my father-in-law, Robert Ashmore, who loves this song and thinks it's one of his and says it's one of his favorite songs of mine. So this is to Andy McClendon for turning me on and to keeping me focused on the great music and impact of Jerry Lee Lewis, and to my father-in-law, Robert Ashmore. I'll take the last train to Memphis. This rock that may be dying. Time to pay my last respects, do my last goodbying. I'll walk down Union Avenue and then visit Jerry Lee. I'll say a prayer for Elvis and then say a prayer for me. I'll take the last train to Memphis. I'll look at that big river, throw in my broken whiskey glass and not even feel a shiver. I'll take the last train to Memphis. I'll holler out the name of every girl whose love I thought would never, ever change. I'll take the last train to Memphis. I'll follow good advice, grind up my life's lesson and then feed it to some mice. I'll take the last train to Memphis. I never thought I would feel so deeply sorry or feel so deeply good. I'll take the last train to Memphis, where Martin met his fate. I was just a little boy on that sorry day. I'll maybe take a little drive down Highway 51. I hope we find it in us to finish what we'd begun. Take the last train to Memphis. I'll visit some old friends, some angels and some devils, and I'll finally make amends. Then I'll listen to those angels who fly with broken wings, sing about a summer that never follows spring. Never follows spring. Straight west of here, 200 miles, Memphis, Tennessee, and the final resting place of Jerry Lee Lewis. May God bless his memory. God bless y'all.